Hello and welcome to a special comics burst from the Full Force podcast, sponsored by Distant Planet Comics and Collectibles, where we take an in-depth look at the newest G.I. Joe comics news and related titles of the week. With me as your host, Chris, I for one welcome our new Cobra overlords, McLeod, aka Diagnostic 80. Joining me on this episode to discuss his upcoming work on the brand new IDW G.I. Joe comic is Paul Allor. So without further ado, let's get stuck into this comics burst. A few weeks ago, IDW Publishing, Cobra, put out a press release, a new campaign of disinformation, revealing a brand new G.I. Joe comic coming in September. In that propagandist material, we were informed that the story will focus on a plot where Cobra wins and takes over the world, with G.I. Joe nothing more than an underground resistance movement. So far we have seen a cover showing a mystery character wearing a tiger emblazoned jacket, staring at a wanted poster of Duke and Scarlet, with buildings surrounding the area covered in Cobra flags and banners. In the name of Cobra, we have managed to capture one of the revolutionaries and writer for the comic to interrogate him over his new wave of anarchist pamphlets. Translated, we have the awesome Paul Allor joining me to talk about his new comic. Hi Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing, bud?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. This is the first interview I've done for this book. I'm really excited about it.
Yes, first. I like that. Exclusive.
Uh-huh. That's right.
Well, yeah, I really appreciate you jumping on. I know you're a busy man at the moment, but I mean, take us through a little bit of your background, if you could, first and foremost. I mean, how did you get into comics?
Sure. I actually had a bit of an unusual road into comics. I won't say I didn't read comics as a kid because comics were around because I grew up in America and I read some of them here and there, but I wasn't really what you would call a comics reader. I don't think I ever bought one as a kid. They were just given to me and just kind of around. It wasn't until I was actually in my late 20s, around the age of 28, that I really got into comics.
Sure.
And that was when I was working as a journalist at the time, and we had a Secret Santa thing in our office, where one of my coworkers knew that I was a fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Nice.
So he got me, and he was a big comics fan, so he got me the first Astonishing X-Men trade from Joss Whedon and John Cassaday. And I really fell in love with it, and I went, and I think the second trade had just come out, and I went and got it, and I started buying other comics and just really fell in love with the medium and started sort of trying to get into comics as a writer at the same time that I was getting into them as a reader.
So had you been a writer previous to that? I mean, was that kind of like your trade, as it were?
Yeah. I was working at a newspaper at the time. So I was a newspaper writer, and I'd written fiction, and that was sort of what I'd always wanted to do. When I was a kid, I wanted to write movies, but I'd never, it hadn't really come together. My life, as life sometimes do, sort of took some detours.
Yeah.
And but no, I ended up getting into journalism and doing that. And that's what I was doing when I started getting into comics. Yeah, I was always a writer, but the comics writing was new, and I actually took a few years to really learn about the medium and to practice writing in the medium. And a big stepping stone there was when I took a class through Comics Experience from Andy Schmidt, who will come up again as we talk about my G.I. Joe journey in a little while.
Awesome.
But yeah, so that really helped kind of catapult me into knowing what I was doing and being able to get out there and start self-publishing my own comics and building on there to get more work for hiring, get into comics.
Sure. Okay, so let's discuss G.I. Joe a touch here. I mean, was G.I. Joe something that was on your radar growing up, or was this something you came to a little bit later on in life?
It was definitely on my radar growing up. Because I was born in 1978, so it's hard to grow up in America in the 1980s without G.I. Joe on your radar in a big way. My older brother was actually a really huge G.I. Joe fan.
Yeah.
He read the comics and he collected all the toys. And because of that, while it was something that I thought was really cool and I watched the cartoon, I wasn't a big G.I. Joe fanatic just because that was kind of my older brother's thing. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So yeah, it was on my radar, something that I thought was cool, but it wasn't really something I was into that much as a kid, especially since we talked about I didn't read comics as either. It really wasn't until, again, when I was an adult and I got into G.I. Joe comics through the early IDW stuff. The 3 issues of the Origins, G.I. Joe and Cobra, all of which I really, really loved. And that kind of hooked me into it. And just, I think a few years back, I read probably the first 50 or so issues of Hama's Real American Hero run and really adored them as well. And then, last fall when I got this gig, I went back and I read the entire Real American Hero run in like 2 months, and that was a very interesting experience.
It gets very addictive as well, doesn't it? Because it's such a fun comic, and especially if you can get it all in trades and stuff as well, and just rinse through it, it's just amazing.
Yeah,
but no, that's really interesting, and it's actually something we get a lot of people on the show. We interview a lot of people. And most people are like, yeah, I had this, I had that, I did this, I did that as a kid with the toys. It's interesting to have someone on the show that's actually come into it later on in life, but then gone back and got just as much as enjoyment out of it as we did when we were kids. So that's
right, exactly.
That's really, really interesting. Okay, well, take us through. How did you land that first Joe gig back in 2013? Was it?
Yeah, it was. Well, the comic came out in 2013. I landed the gig like about 3 or 4 years before that. Actually,
okay, wow.
Yeah. That was kind of interesting. My first couple comics were self-published comics.
Yeah.
My first licensed to work for hire comic that came out was in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Now you're talking my language. You're talking my language now.
Right. but that was the second one I was hired for. The first one I was hired for was actually G.I. Joe.
Right.
And what happened is, like I mentioned, I took the comics experience intro to writing class that Andy Schmidt taught.
Yeah.
And Andy at the time was a senior editor at IDW overseeing the G.I. Joe line.
Yeah.
And so I kind of became a fan of it through that. And what actually happened is, spoilers for a 10-year-old comic that everyone listening to this podcast has read, but when Cobra Commander was killed in that comic.
Yeah. That was one hell of a panel, by the way. I remember that was one of that actually has become quite an iconic moment. With just out, and considering it's later on in the run, it's quite interesting that had such a powerful kind of impact as well, didn't it? Yeah. Sorry, carry
on. No, you're fine. So after that happened, Andy did an interview and Comic Book Resources, or one of the big comic sites about it.
Yeah.
And he talked about the fact that there's going to be a replacement Cobra Commander, and how the mythology of the new G.I. Joe is that Cobra Commander is a job, not a person.
Yeah.
And so not only are there future Cobra Commanders, but they're also there were past Cobra Commanders. And he kind of he very casually mentioned and maybe someday we'll go back and tell the story of some of these past Cobra Commanders.
Awesome.
So I read that, and I instantly hopped on my emailed Andy, and I was like, if you ever want to tell some if you ever want to do a past Cobra Commander comic, he's focused on different one-shot stories of them, I'm your guy. I would absolutely love to do that.
Amazing.
And to my surprise, he was like, well, pitch me something. So I was like, okay, yeah. So we started talking, and we pitched things around. And like I said, the reason it took so long to come out is that the original idea of it was that I got hired to do a series of I think 8 to 12 page stories about different Cobra Commanders in the past. And it was going to be a digital series.
Right. That's cool.
Yeah. So I wrote them all. I was pretty happy with them. Then things kind of, their publishing plans kind of shifted. Andy ended up leaving IDW right around that time. And John Barber replaced him. And John was really liked the scripts and was incredibly supportive. But he was since we're not doing the digital plans like we thought. So this is also back when Comixology was just starting up, and it was kind of a wild west of digital comics, when publishers were all trying new things, and plans were falling by the wayside, and it was an interesting time. But he was I'd like to still do something with these, but I don't know when it'll be, but just stay tuned, it's going to happen.
Yeah. So
fast forward to literally years later, and it ended up being transmuted into the first 2 issues of the 4-issue G.I. Joe run that I did that came out in 2013, where basically John came back and was like, hey, we need someone to write a couple of issues of the main book. Would you be willing to, transform your G.I. Joe Cobra Commander stories into something for the main G.I. Joe book? And I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds good. So I ended up writing that sort of connective tissue story, where it featured different past Cobra Commander stories along the way, drawn by different artists, including one that was drawn by Chris Avenhouse, and that was how we first got to know each other. So this is kind of our G.I. Joe reunion. Can
I just say, I'm glad you've pronounced his name before I've had to say it, because I always struggle with that. It says Evenhouse, right?
I think it's Avenhouse. Honestly, I say Avenhouse. I'm saying it wrong.
I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it exactly how you say it, and then at least we're both in trouble.
Okay, yeah, exactly. I feel like that's like, he's Dutch, and so I feel like that's a decent English approximation of the Dutch language, which
I agree. I think
sounds like you're talking from the back of your throat.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
I'm gonna have to get him on the show now just so he can say it for real. But yeah,
there you go. Excellent. That'd be awesome. But yeah, so anyway, I'm rambling, but that ended up being those first 2 issues, and then John came back and was like, well, we need another 2 issues as well. Would you be willing to do 2 more that don't deal with the past Cobra Commanders that are more like a sequel to it? And I was like, yeah, that'd be awesome as well. So it's kind of interesting too that I think that of those original continuity, those original runs, I was the first G.I. Joe proper book that didn't actually feature any G.I. Joe characters for those first 2 issues.
Wow.
It was entirely Cobra characters. And then, we got to do the fun thing where the last 2 issues, we sort of were about G.I. Joe, but sort of like spinning off of the Cobra story, but looking at it from the other side. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. It was great, and I always hope to be able to get back and do more G.I. Joe. And I did the G.I. Joe Deviations one-shot along the way. With,
that was fun.
Yeah, Corey Lewis, which is a very, very different kind of book. But yeah, so I've been kind of since then, I've been kind of champing at the bit to get back and really do something on G.I. Joe again in a big way. And now I just, I feel like Charlie being put in charge of a chocolate factory right now. So it's pretty great.
You mentioned that you were rambling earlier on. Do not worry about that. You ramble away because there's some good stuff coming out here, mate.
I will. Correct.
Well, okay. So, I mean, how was that first Joe experience? I mean, how did it have any, or does it have any bearing on how you approached this particular new story? Did it kind of help you kind of lead into this new thing, or is it completely separate?
It's pretty separate. I mean, this is a very different type of continuity that we're doing here. I know that G.I. Joe has been relaunched, obviously, several times through IDW, but I believe that every relaunch they've ever done has, while it's been to some extent or another, a break from the past, it's always been the same continuity.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I think this is the first time that they're actually saying, okay, this is the new G.I. Joe #1. It's an absolutely new continuity. Everything is different. Everything is starting from scratch. So that's really exciting. And so because of that, I'm trying very intentionally not to bring, any of my past ideas from that old continuity into this, but it did have a bearing just because as I was doing it, I was of course always thinking about other things I would like to do if I was given a little bit more free reign. And now that I have that,
all the ideas are flowing out now, aren't they?
I'm collaborating with Chris and Brittany Peer, our amazing colorist, and Bobby Kernow, our fantastic editor who I've worked with for years on the Ninja Turtle stuff and Hasbro and IDW. So every time I say that's really we, but it's I get carried away. But
not at all. I totally understand what you mean. Right. I've always found that really it's such a shame. Not like a shame, but it's difficult when you've got the writer, you've got the artist. That's usually they're the two that rise to the surface on a comic, and it's no slight on everyone else working on it. It's just that's kind of how it's always been in the industry. It's pushed those kind of people to the forefront. But the inkers are very, very, very important in making that artwork look look even better than it did in the pencil stage. And then the colorist you could argue has very much a make or break, they're a make or break cog in that machine as well. So
absolutely, yeah.
It's a shame that a lot of people get kind of missed, as it were, or not kind of kept up there. But I know exactly what you mean. I mean, it's unfortunately it's just the way of things, isn't it? It's kind of everyone gravitates towards the artist and writer.
Right. I will say on our book, we don't have an inker because Chris is working digitally, so he
fantastic.
Does the whole thing there. I am so thrilled that we got Brittany on board.
Yeah.
She's just doing such incredible work, and also because Chris's style is really gorgeous, but he has a very European clean line style. Yeah. That I think coloring is always extraordinarily important, but I think it can make or break that particular art style even more.
Yeah, agreed, totally.
And the first time I saw Brittany's colors over his art, I was just like, okay, yeah, this is gonna work. This is gonna be fantastic. They just make a really great storytelling team.
From what I've seen, we've got did you do the colors for the cover as well?
No, Chris did the colors on the cover. But
well, we have seen that first 4 panels that you posted earlier today on Twitter, so we can talk about that. But that, again, she's done a fantastic job. It's amazing. Like, it looks so, I don't know, it just, the art style, the colour and everything, it just evokes a really interesting feeling based on what the actual story is about. And before we get, let's get into that, because obviously we want to get into this new comic and everything that it's about.
Yes.
So the angle you're approaching this from is really interesting, with Joe as insurgents fighting against the odds with this kind of Cobra world order. How long has this been in development? How long have you worked on this? And was it a case of, well, did you have to pitch this one, is what I'm going to say?
I did, yeah. This was kind of an interesting process, because I don't know if I should say this, but we actually, let me just say, we took a couple different approaches on this before we settled into the one we went with.
Interesting. I like it.
Yeah. And this was actually, like, I mentioned this on, like, the Hissing forums the other day, that, like, you know, it was really Hasbro that brought to the table this idea that, you know, we want something where we're at full out war with Cobra, where they're not just a terrorist group, they're like a global power, and, you know, we want that to sort of reflect, you know, some of the political tensions of today. They didn't say that. That's sort of my extrapolation of what they said. But you know, I mean, that was the impression I got. So, but I mentioned that in the Hissing forums, and I got some reaction from a couple of people who were like, "Oh, you know, so Hasbro is taking a really heavy hand in this. No, they're treating this as a IP farm." I'm like, no. So just, I say that because I don't want to take credit for coming up with an idea that I just helped develop.
Sure.
But, like, you know, Hasbro's been a fantastic partner, and they're not doing anything that every licensor doesn't do on, you know,
of course,
in their comics, because it's their property, and of course they're going to take a keen interest in it, especially when it's one of their flagship properties, as G.I. Joe obviously is with Hasbro. So having said that, as sort of my caveat, that this is not like an anti-Hasbro thing, or, you know, this is not me saying that they're, like, taking too heavy a hand or anything. They did come to us with the idea of, you know, this idea of both Cobra being a global power, and then also with the idea of G.I. Joe being, as opposed to like a traditional military organization as it's been in the past, an organization that is recruiting civilians behind enemy lines to serve as, like, you know, spies, assassins, saboteurs, and that's based on programs that both England and the U.S. had in World War II.
Yeah, like the SOE program.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and they absolutely name checked that and was like, you know, this is kind of the model that we want to use for this. So, which I found that extraordinarily fascinating. So
big time. I find it fascinating that Hasbro were game on doing something like that. Like, that's something that's quite shocking. But yeah, carry on, Paul. Sorry.
Right. No, so they came to me with that very loose framework. I think it was basically just, like, you know, the SOE idea and the fact that, like, Cobra would be a world power, and I pitched them back something more specific and fleshed out. Like, I don't think they necessarily expected me to start the book with Cobra being as much in control as it was.
Yeah.
You know, I think they would have been happy with it just being like a war where it was more, you know, evenly matched still.
Yeah.
But I really like the idea of just going all out with it, and also kind of like flipping the script a little bit on the fact that if you look at the last 15 years of warfare in America and around the world, it's really been the story, at least where American and European forces are concerned, of these, like, really vast, powerful militaries that are sort of being, like, ground to a perpetual standstill by asymmetrical warfare and by rebel forces. Yeah. So I thought it'd be interesting to flip that, where Cobra is the vast, powerful military, and G.I. Joe is put in the position of being that resistance group that, like, is just basically fighting to grind them to a standstill, even though victory really feels out of reach.
It's quite interesting when you put it like that, because I hadn't really thought of it like that yet. When I kind of look at it now, because you still, obviously, when you've got the G.I. Joe brand on top of it, you think the heroes, the good guys, and etc. etc. And right. I know that's still the case here, but it's still like you are kind of, they're swapping roles effectively. They've become the terrorist organization in a sense, haven't they?
I would.
Well. Yeah, that's probably not the best way of putting it.
I want to put on the record that I did not say that G.I. Joe is a terrorist organization. I would not agree with that.
It's okay. You can go on my record.
I like the idea of just playing with blurring those lines.
Yes. That's much better. That's way more political. Thank you. Well, they are diplomatic, I'll say.
They are definitely the heroes. They are definitely the good guys. But we're not going to shy away from the fact that war is complex.
Yes.
It's like just like Larry Hama's run has never shied away from that. So
apologies to everyone out there, by the way. I didn't mean to say that.
My heart skipped like 3 beats.
I know,
like,
yes, I say. So, hang on, G.I. Joe are the terrorists? No, they are not. They are not. But yeah, so it's interesting that those lines are blurred, absolutely, and that just gives us good radio. What?
There you go.
I mean, what else can you tell us about the overall story without the Vipers busting down your doors?
Yeah. Okay. So as I said, it is a story where it takes place where Cobra has largely taken over very large segments of the world, and so G.I. Joe is a program that's bringing civilians in. So we're gonna have a mix of existing characters and new characters.
Oh, brilliant!
Should be pretty interesting. Yeah. The cover that's out, the guy in the tiger jacket is one of our new characters.
Will the tiger jacket be explained at any point, or is it just design?
It's just design. He's Cambodian.
Okay.
I think tigers are actually extinct in Cambodia now, or classified as extinct. But it's just a heritage thing for him, and also like I think a stylistic thing for him. That it seems like the kind of thing that character would rock out on.
Interesting. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I mean, it's also aimed at being a very character-based book. Like we're really there's gonna be thrilling. There's gonna be like exciting action in it. But we're really going to dig deep also into the men and women involved and into their character and into like what they're going through as they fight this war. Another thing I can tell you is that it's going to be, at least at the beginning, largely based around one-shot issues. So each issue is going to be its own mission. Each issue is going to be its own training session, or it's going to be a thing where you can just pick up one issue and you have everything you need just to enjoy that story.
Brilliant.
Which like the early days of A Real American Hero before it started to get a little bit more serialized as well. So I guess I would ask you, like, what do you think the fans would want to know about?
Well, if the fans would want to know everything about it, including all spoilers,
right.
I think like in terms of the characters that you mentioned, or the characterization that you mentioned, and also the fact you're saying new characters and old characters and that kind of stuff. Obviously, you can talk about the new character on the cover with the jacket. Obviously, that's a new character. I don't want you to go into loads and loads of detail, because obviously we want to read the comic and we wanted to enjoy that, obviously. And I'm sure you can't just go out and tell us. This is the lineup of characters we're doing.
Right.
But obviously, we have seen the Viper design. That looks really, really cool.
Yeah.
And again, like a new take on like the classic kind of design. That's really nice. So we've seen Duke and Scarlet. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing those two are going to be the main characters of the book, or at least the main characters from the G.I. Joe side of things.
Duke and Scarlet, their role in the book is that they are overseeing the G.I. Joe program and overseeing the training.
Cool.
So that's kind of their role as like the more mentorship characters, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Is there any? I take it there's going to be kind of prologue to this, like as in that we'll get later on. Is that true? Do we get to see how this has happened at any stage in the book?
One would think. Eventually, I honestly yeah, we are going to get to that, but I don't know if there's ever going to be a thing where it's like, now this is the issue that explains it all. I think it's going to be more a thing where you just kind of like pick up different pieces of it as you go along.
That's great. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I really did want to just throw people in and like let you sort of figure it out as we went along.
Like any good film where someone keeps asking me every 5 minutes, why is that happening? And I'm like, well, just wait and you'll find out. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I like stories where the audience or the readership has to be engaged and has to sort of like put the pieces together to a certain extent themselves and keep up. So I've
been kind of a little bit annoyed at the spoon feeding that's been going on in most of media recently. Like, it's just everything we get has to be, every single gap has to be filled. There can be no space for mystery or imagination for the actual viewer. And that's good to know that's happening throughout the book. That's great.
One thing I did want to mention is that we're going to be kind of like slow rolling a lot of the elements of G.I. Joe. So, I mean, like characters that you would expect to show up in issue 1, Cobra Commander, don't show up until later.
That's great. No, that's brilliant.
And it's funny how like again, like as I've been talking to folks, like I'm getting a lot of questions like, when does Serpentor show up? When does this person show up? And it's like, or not when does, but like are you using them?
Yeah.
Do you have plans for them? And it's kind of like, if you look back on the original run, like all that stuff did not come out in the first 6 issues. Like I think Serpentor shows up around like issue 49 or 50.
Yeah, when he gets made. Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting problem, for lack of a better word, of doing, long-standing comics properties, is that, these stories were developed over years and years and years originally, but now
you don't get that option, unfortunately.
Yeah. Kind of expecting everything to like be put in right from the start, and we're not going to do that. Like, I hope this book does really well. I think it has the potential to do really well. I know it's a fantastic book, but I will say that, like, I'm not doing the thing where I'm like, planning an exit at issue 6 or issue 12 just in case. Like, we are absolutely planning this as a long run, which I was a bit of a risky gambit, but we'll see how it plays out.
To be honest, that is the better way to go about it, because if it does, well, I don't want to say if, like, or even when. I don't want to say either of those things, but
right. Okay.
In the horrible outcome that it does get some kind of canned.
Oh,
what does it?
Never mind. I won't say when. Then I thought you were going in the other direction.
No. But what does it? I mean, what would it matter if it stopped abruptly? Do you know what I mean? Like, right. I kind of feel like, if it does stop abruptly and it's cancelled, then at least you may kind of leave a door open for people being more intrigued as to what happens in the future. But at the same time, doing that thing where you kind of almost like write in exit strategies, I'd be like, no, forget that. Like, it's just it's the wrong. You're going the right way about it by just going, right, this is gonna be successful, and we're gonna just keep going on with it.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And there's nothing to say that it won't be, because it is a really interesting and fun angle for G.I. Joe, I think. Did you feel as though G.I. Joe needed a new direction as well? I mean, other than Hasbro coming to you or saying, we'd like you to do this with it to a degree, did you feel like it needed completely different direction? I don't
know if I'd use the word need, but yeah, I think it certainly doesn't hurt. And I mean, especially the fact that you still have a Real American Hero coming out every month, like, I will say we don't need that book again. I'm not gonna write that book better than Larry Hama writes it. Totally. So I do think that it seemed like it was time for a new take, a different take, alongside the existing stuff.
Agreed. Yeah.
That takes a look at what does G.I. Joe look like in our modern world, in the anxieties that people are feeling in this modern world. What can you do with that that's different than what you've done before, while still being true to the spirit of the book and to everything that it stands for.
And I think that's brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Like, as you said, Larry's doing that book and it's great and everyone's loving it, and including myself. So it's nice to have these options as well. It's nice to have like lots of different universes going on and different kind of takes and one shots here and there. That I've missed that, in all honesty, when we've kind of minimized some of the output from the comics from G.I. Joe. One thing I would like to ask you about is specifically about the book, and again, you can tell me to leave in a very nasty way if you want me to.
Will do.
You can do that anyway. But what era does it take place in? Or is it one of those things where because it's in like a different universe, it doesn't really have the same ties to what our kind of timeline and universe?
I think it's that, yeah. In the pitch, I said, like, it's I started off the pitch by saying it's the near future and the world is 1 minute closer to midnight. But I sort of used near future as a way of saying, things have sort of advanced along the roads that we're seeing now a little bit further.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we're never going to like pin down exactly what year it is, but I would say it's a different world than ours that has like some more advanced technology, and where, the creeping rise of fascism that we've seen all over the globe in recent years has advanced significantly further. So yeah, and there are
so you're saying about 2020 then, right? You're saying December 2019. Got you.
Oh boy.
I'm kidding. He did not say that. That was all me. Carry on, Paul. Sorry, I keep interrupting you.
Yes, no problem. That's it. That's all I got. That's all I got.
I've ruined him, guys. I've ruined him. I'm so sorry. I've broken him.
I'm done now.
Okay, so we discussed the Joe roster slightly. You're gonna expand that and progress with lots of different characters.
Mm-hmm.
We've already talked about the art, but I would like to kind of go into a bit more detail with it.
Sure.
I mean, from what we've seen so far, it looks gorgeous, looks absolutely beautiful, and it does give off that vibe that works well with the premise. I mean, how happy are you to be working with this team, including Chris?
Oh, I'm thrilled. Yeah, I asked that Chris be considered for the
brilliant.
book, and I was really happy that they not only considered him but also brought him on board. Like I said, Chris and I have known each other for years since we did the G.I. Joe story together.
Yeah.
In my original run. And then we had a book out from Aftershock last year called Monstro Mechanica.
Yeah.
Which we were both really, really happy with how that came out. And so, yeah, to be reunited on this again is just so thrilling. I mean, Chris is he's just the whole package. I mean, his storytelling is just so incredibly sharp. His character work is fantastic.
Yeah.
He can just like switch on a dime from like humor to drama to action, and just make it all feel very, very
natural.
Yeah, thank you. And very organic.
That's better.
And yeah, and Brittany, and like I said, Brittany is doing just such a wonderful job on the art, or excuse me, on the color. Like I always have trouble talking about colorists because I don't know enough about color to say like what I like about what they're doing.
Sure.
But I feel like the palette that she's using really brings something out. It's kind of like it has a great balance between like a more realistic palette and a more like emotion-driven palette. If that makes sense. Yeah. And it's just fantastic. Fantastic storytelling in the color where she really, really helps lead your eye exactly where it needs to go, and just has like just the right amount of texture to really draw out Chris's clean line style. And it's just on top of it, it's just gorgeous. It's just a really, really gorgeous book.
I totally agree, especially that first kind of panel you shared with us today, and the cover looks gorgeous. I mean, the color scheme as well in general looks just really nice. Yeah, really good palette, and kind of like very kind of soft at the same time. As it's not like it's not too sharp or dark or anything like that. It's just really kind of gives off this very, you're right, it gives off a real clear emotion, doesn't it?
Yeah. And
that's something that I think you guys have done amazing together. Now, as far as the collaboration works, I've always been interested in how that, you know, I'm sure it's different on every single book that every single group works on, but how does that collaboration work? I mean, are you describing a lot of these things and then Chris is kind of churning things out and sending them to you, and then you're going yay or nay or change this or change that? I mean, how does that work as a collaboration?
Well, you know, since Chris and I because we've worked together so much and because we're really close friends as well, I would say this is a much closer collaboration than you usually get with licensed comics.
Yeah.
On most licensed comics, you know, sometimes you'll talk directly to the artist, but often it's all funneled through the editor.
Yeah.
Whereas on this one, we kind of cleared it with Bobby, our wonderful editor. We're like, hey, you know, you mind if we can sort of talk offline about, you know, away from our conversations about different design aspects? And he's like, yeah, sure, go for it.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, we talk a lot about the look of the book. He runs like character ideas by me. He's like name check like specific ideas he has for the characters. Like, hey, I think it'd be cool if this character like, you know, has this quality or this trait and that kind of thing. So, yeah. And in turn, like I sent him an email the other day where I was like, hey, you know, here's what I have planned for issue 10 between these two characters, and I wanted to let you know that because it sort of informs like, you know, their relationship, and so it'll help you with everything you do with them up until then. So, but yeah, so it's a very close collaboration in that regard.
You basically become one person, don't you, in this situation?
As close to one person as you can get, while, you know,
being separate,
having different jobs and being on different continents. Yeah,
exactly the same.
Right. The thing that Kieran Gillen talked about years ago, where like someone, it wasn't WigDiv, I think it was Phonogram, where someone reviewed one of his books with Jamie McKelvey, and they mistakenly thought that the whole book was written and drawn by someone named like Gillen McKelvey. And so their review like repeatedly referred to like Gillen McKelvey as a person.
That's amazing.
And he was like, that kind of works, you know, in terms of like, when you're reviewing comics, you really don't know who brought what to the table.
That's so true, yeah.
So it really does help you just look at it as like a storytelling unit.
You should do that. You should all just combine names, and then the credit will just be this huge name.
Exactly. Yes.
And then you have to like work it out, like countdown. Like you have to kind of rearrange all the letters. Anyway.
Right.
And so, I mean, something that I found really interesting about this whole story premise, and that was the way that IDW went full-on method with everything.
You're right. I did not know that was coming either.
That was brilliant, I thought. And like how they, you know, the Twitter feed was taken over by Cobra on the reveal, and the press release was done as a propaganda kind of, you know, anti-propaganda thing by Cobra, or propaganda thing by Cobra. I thought it was great, and I love how that was done. And I've always enjoyed that kind of, you know, where there's a bridge between the fans and the company. I've always loved that with the toys, whenever they do fan votes or interact with the fan base in some way, shape or form. And to do that with Twitter, I just thought was a masterstroke. And obviously with yourself, you've been very active in interacting with fans online. You already mentioned the Histank forums, which you jumped on earlier, and I think was the reason you ended up on this show was because one of our kind of co-presenters, Paddy, messaged you to say you need to be on the full force, and then
right, yeah, exactly.
So again, like that. How important are those platforms in the build up towards a comic release like this one?
I think it's incredibly important, yeah, because I mean, comics just rely so much on pre-orders and on those first issues, like to probably a greater extent than they should. Like, so really, like, if you look at the way the market is shifting more toward people buying trades, and reading collections, but comics publishers still aren't necessarily geared toward that long term of a game plan financially.
Yeah.
So the issues are just so incredibly important. And anything you can do to get the word out, to get excitement going, and to really get those numbers out as much as possible from the jump is just. And I was so thrilled with what IDW did and the way they handled that, and they've all been so incredibly supportive. So, and I'm hoping to continue that myself with doing as many interviews as I can, reaching out to retailers, offering them, personalized interviews for their websites, videos for their websites, whatever they need. So I really just want to, and like I said, continuing to answer questions on the Histank forums and on Twitter, just be as available as I can be while still, while still getting the scripts in.
Still working on it, yeah. It's like, oh my god, the job has become monumentally huge for you guys now, hasn't it? I mean, it's really evolved over the years, hasn't it?
Yeah, it really has. Yeah, and I feel like it used to be a case where it was more like when you were doing your own creator-owned thing, you were doing more of the marketing stuff, and the license stuff was a little bit more hands-off from the creators. But I feel like these days the creators, especially on a book like this where it's an ongoing, and we're launching it from issue 1, like. To be fair, no one from IDW has said to me, you've got to bust your ass on marketing on this.
Okay.
That's not the situation at all.
Yeah,
that's just something that we're doing on our own to make sure that the book is a success.
It's nice that IDW allow that to kind of happen though, to a certain degree, or not allow it to happen, but they're not too stringent on you kind of getting the word out in that sense, and that's probably again like where we've come now in the way that comics are promoted. It's like all hands on deck, really, isn't it? It's like everyone kind of doing that thing to get the spread, the reach, the kind of get eyes on the product. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, do you ever get a little concerned with utilizing social media? Do you ever get a little bit worried about how you may interact with somebody in a certain way, and that may cause issues? Do you ever kind of get a little bit concerned in that sense that you may, like having all of this kind of not free reign as such, but all of this ability to kind of go out there and just instantly interact with the fans and everything? Does that ever concern you that you might go, oh, I shouldn't have said that, or how do I deal with this? I mean, is there a case of training in this kind of area?
I would say I would describe it less as a little bit of concern and more as a state of constant terror. That is a concern of mine.
Brilliant.
I am rather afraid of saying the wrong thing or revealing too much, or but yeah, I mean, I just try to be candid and honest and forthright and hope that the chips fall where they may, and so far it's worked out.
Amazing. Well, Paul, I wish you all the luck with this amazing book, because I'm really excited. I can't wait for that first issue. Not at all. It's coming out in September, correct?
Yes, it sure is. And you can pre-order it now from your comic shop, and you should if you want to be guaranteed a copy.
Already done that. So,
awesome. Well, I was talking to the audience, Chris, but thank you.
Not a problem. Unfortunately, the audience, I'm the only one that listens to it. I just do these podcasts for me. I tricked you by coming on, and then it's like I collect these interviews and then just listen to them myself and pretend I've got this big multimedia empire, which I don't have. No, honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet you properly. Well, virtually, Paul. Absolute pleasure. And like I said, best of luck with everything. That kind of brings us to the end of the interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Not at all. So where can people follow you before you go?
Sure. The main place is Twitter, at Paul Allor.
I meant your address, like your home address.
Yeah. Well, that'll be after I I was trying to think of something I could do though. Tick off the fan base. I don't even want to joke. So
amazing. But yeah, sorry, Twitter.
Yes, Twitter is just at Paul Allor, Allor. Yeah, I'm on Facebook, but I don't really use it very much. I'm on Instagram, but it's mostly just pictures of my dog. So if you like dachshunds,
amazing.
You should follow me on Instagram because I have a really cute one. Yeah, Twitter's the main place where I work to interact with folks.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much. And again, good luck with everything. And by the way, can we get you on again to chat about the comic once it's up and running? Maybe like a few issues in, or a number of issues in. How would you feel about that?
No, this is the last time you'll ever hear from me.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, no, that sounds good, man. Definitely.
I just wanted to double. I was gonna ask you afterwards. I'll play along with this just in case. No, he's being serious. Oh my goodness. Only kidding. That's it for this instalment of the Full Force Comics Burst. Thank you to my awesome guest Paul Allor. See you next time, and as always, full force. I mean, all hail mighty Cobra.
Awesome.
Make sure you get involved with the discussion by liking, sharing and commenting on these videos, and as always you can keep up with the show after listening by following on Twitter at The Full Force, liking the Facebook page, facebook.com/The Full Force, and if you would like to contact the show you can message us on either of those platforms with feedback or questions. We have also started a Patreon page, so if you want to see your name up in lights on these videos or enjoy exclusive bonus content, then check out patreon.com/The Full Force Podcast, or click the link on any of the posts this podcast appears in. Full Force. And a big shout out to our sponsors, Distant Planet Comics and Collectibles, located at 601 Business Loop 70 West Suite 263, located in the Parkade Center, Columbia, Missouri. You can visit their website at distantplanetcomics.com and on Facebook at facebook.com/distantplanetcomics.